Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to the video on the third party system here in the United States. I'm counting this as from about 1864 until the election of 1900. The Civil War kind of really messes things up, if we're honest, when it comes to elections, but it is what it is. Actually, I would almost even consider Utah a toss-up. So this party system was defined by the legacy. At the start, it was defined by the legacy of the Civil War and Reconstruction. And for the first couple of years, despite what we would later find or come to term the Solid South, a lot of southern states actually would give their votes to the Republican candidate, and this is because a lot of former Confederates weren't allowed to vote at that time. Once federal troops left, well, they voted straight ticket Democratic, and a lot of African Americans who had been able to vote, and even a few who had been put into Congress, or at least the Senate, I forget which one, if I'm 100% honest, in the South, were voted out and quickly disenfranchised effectively. And you start seeing why I would consider a state like Missouri, Kentucky, and West Virginia, why I would even reasonably consider them part of the South. It's because not only are they more culturally similar to their southern states, it's easier to split them geographically into the South. Missouri, at least in this part of the state, at least in the southern part, has a lot more in common with Arkansas and Tennessee than it does with states like Kansas and Illinois and Iowa and Nebraska. But that's beside the point. Towards the end, you actually had a lot of states that were populist. And even though Montana never gave its votes to the nominee of a populist party, they always tend to decide with a more populist candidate, because at the end of the era you had William Jennings Bryan, and this is actually where you get the kind of weird bridge between the American Civil War and Reconstruction and the populist movement. This party system is really hard to define. The issues were changed very quickly, and the truth is, there's nothing really that can define it. There was a lot of corruption in the big cities like New York and Boston, Philadelphia, to lesser extents D.C. D.C. still wasn't a big city. Some of the port towns, I guess. And they would be controlled by party bosses who would make sure that their party controlled that city. And you had a ton of corruption, so if you were pledging to fight hard against corruption, you could win elections. Again, New York was a very powerful swing state. It would flip rapidly between one election and the next. And a few other swing states I would consider are states that voted for either both populist and a Republican, or a populist and a Democrat, or just some weird combination that I kind of found hard to classify what a swing state was. California was reasonably competitive, so I can actually list that as a swing state. Nevada was contested a few times, Oregon a few times. Again, nothing really in the South. New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland all flipped once, but that was a very weird situation, dealing with a repeat candidate. Democrats nominated William Jennings Bryan twice in a row at the very end of this system. And the realignment really was the result of the rise of populism in the United States. And some people saw it as populism is dangerous, especially considering this was more in connection with unionization and a lot of left-wing ideas. the Americas were still extremely conservative, and especially when it came to economics and marketplaces, they were still very much business oriented. There were a few exceptions, of course. Coal miners in West Virginia and Appalachia in general were a little skeptical. At least the common person was skeptical of big business and all that. Towards the end, you start getting and seeing the rise of unions such as the AFL-CIO and all the other big worldwide unions. And a lot of people can link them to some of these violent anarchist movements that were popping up in Europe. And it's not an unreasonable association because it's perfectly valid. And a lot of people saw that unions were dangerous, and people fought back hard against them in a lot of places. Democrats tended to have a lot better relationship with unions, and you're going to see this pop up later on in other party systems, is that unions tended to support Democrats because Democrats were like, okay, unions can exist. Republicans were not big fans of unions back then, and hilariously, it's a lot less simple than it was back then, where Republicans were like, no. Because we have to remember, Republicans' base was still in the manufacturing heartland. It was still in New England. And so they were very business-oriented and wanted to protect American businesses. So they were big on tariffs. They didn't want businesses to be slowed by strikes or have to pay higher wages, which would reduce profits, stuff like that. Democrats were still fairly agricultural, fairly rural, and towards the end of the party system, you actually saw that they had some influence in the Rocky Mountains and the Great Plains. William Jennings Bryan, for example, won Wyoming. And actually, towards the end of this era, a few other big issues cropped up, which is the temperance movement, and that was really just a push to ban stuff like drinking alcohol or smoking and stuff like that, and also limit some of the stuff that and this was brought up as part of the women's rights movement, the first wave of the women's push for the right to vote and for women's rights in general, except maybe I think that really begins with Seneca Falls back in the 1820s or 40s. It may be the 30s, but it's either the 20s or the 40s if I remember correctly. Anyway, and you start seeing some of the western states starting to allow women to vote. Wyoming was the first to do it under a Republican-controlled. They had control of the state in terms of politically, and it was in 1872 or 76. It was 72 or 76 that the territory, because it wasn't a state quite yet, but the territory allowed women to vote, and when it became a state, they carried that over. So some states would actually allow women to vote. A lot of states didn't. And we'll see that carry over into the fourth party system after realignment. Because a lot of these newer 20th century issues started coming to the forefront. Unions, women's rights, temperance. Towards the end of the era, we start actually talking about and looking at America's place in the world, and not just the United States staying focused on the Americas and anti-colonialism in terms of foreign policy. We actually get in 1898, some people would say that's in the fourth party system. I would say not quite. In 1898, of course, we have the Spanish-American War, which actually gives the United States some colonial possessions. We get Cuba, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Guam. I think we already had, the U.S. Virgin Islands we had already purchased from the Netherlands. We had already purchased Alaska from the Russians, and Hawaii had been annexed as a territory after a bunch of American business owners staged a coup d'etat and took over the island. And yeah, we won't go into how controversial that is these days. I think we got one other territory. I think it may have been the Northern Marianas Islands. But we got all of that from our war with Spain, which we won, quite obviously. And chances are that was an unjustified conflict, because the Maine probably blew up due to mismanagement on the USS Maine rather than a Spanish mine or torpedo or whatever. This is where you also see the rise of Teddy Roosevelt, the rise of nationalism, and a lot of modernism. Electricity is starting to be placed in some cities, though it really started in Europe first, but it's starting to trickle over into larger cities. Immigration starts to be regulated during this party system as well, a lot more heavily. There's the Chinese Exclusion Act. There are quotas on which groups of Europeans can immigrate. A lot of people actually have direct ancestors, either grandparents or great-grandparents, who first immigrated to the United States towards the end of this era, in the late basically from 1880 till about 1910. So that's about it. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time. And don't forget, if you actually did enjoy, likes, comments, and subscriptions really do help. It helps grow the channel. It helps me learn more about what you guys actually like, and it helps me create better content, especially for constructive criticisms. Today I just didn't have time to script this episode, but I'll go back to scripting these and a lot of the other videos I put out on this channel on Monday. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. See you guys next time. Bye.